Well, thank you so much for parents for taking time out of your day, especially after work, especially after maybe cooking dinner, taking care of the kids to come out and really invest in your child's future. Camille and Hannah led a fantastic session earlier about the benefits of career exploration within Uplift. So we're very, very glad to have you. And we're going to get started in about one more minute in order to discuss financial aid, So we have Williams also, excellent. And I want to take the time to remind you, use this chat if you do have questions. We have a great group of staff and faculty who are here today to answer your questions when they can, but you can also use the Q&A feature in Zoom that is located below. And I'm hoping to cover all of your questions today within this 60-minute time slot. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Are you guys able to see the financial aid PowerPoint? Excellent, excellent. Okay. So now that we've had a chance to introduce yourselves and what campus you represent, welcome Uplift. We are a large village and it's great to have you guys. But let me introduce myself and take the opportunity of for my colleagues to also do the same. My name's Sarita Pritchett. I'm one of the college and career counselors at Uplift Hampton Preparatory, and I love what I do. I've been in education 10 years. I've worked at Hampton for 5, and my goal is to not only ensure that scholars have the opportunity to apply to great institutions. When you hear me use the term institution, I'm referring to a college or university, but also to be able to explore all of the options that they have to afford it as well. Okay, that's a little bit about myself. But if you guys can take yourselves off mute, I have 3 great colleagues who also do this work in the Road to College and Career Department.
Hi everyone, so my name is Hannah Hendricks. I presented in the session earlier. I'm the manager of career exploration and experience. So I get to develop lots of fun career initiatives for our high school scholars so that they can explore different career and major options.
Hi everyone. Some of y'all met me on the last session. I work with Hannah and I'm the Director of Corporate Relations and Career Services. So I'm also on the career development team here at Uplift.
Good evening, my name is Robert Ortiz and I'm the Director for Family Engagement for College and Career. So I'm excited to be here with all of you. I will present our last session, which will be at 6, and we'll cover ways that families can be involved in the college and career journey and how you can be updated throughout the year, but more importantly, be part of that decision-making process with your scholar.
All right, so thank you so much, Robert, Hannah, and Camille. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to introduce yourselves. And we have a really great team, guys, a very large department that makes up our Road to College and Career Department. And we are just 4 out of many. And so if you guys have questions about financial aid, absolutely ask. You do not have to raise your hand, although that's a really great feature in Zoom. Just feel free to use the Q&A feature and we will definitely get to your question. But if you also have questions regarding career exploration as well, we can try to get to those also during our Q&A part of this session. So let's get started. As you guys are aware, usually in our Uplift classroom, we discuss what the scholar will be able to achieve by the end of our lesson. And so during this session, I hope that you guys will be able to distinguish the difference between different types of aid, one of which is called need-based aid and the other is called gift-based aid. I want you all to be able to distinguish between the two, define the different types of aid with regard to federal, state, institutional, and outside aid, and then also just be able to determine how you can best prepare for your child's future or for your junior or senior future. Now, in order for us to get started and really learn about the nitty-gritty of financial aid, it's important to know that there are many different costs affiliated with your institution: tuition and fees, room and board, books, supplies, transportation, study abroad. And so I'm going to break that down. But overall, whenever you look at the bill or the ticket for college, we call that the cost of attendance. So what is the overall, that the cost of attendance is a term that's used to describe the overall expenses that a student will incur while in college. So we're going to break that down even further. So the first thing that I want you guys to realize is that we have tuition, the cost of classes. So how much does it cost to take that one class, or excuse me, to take the multitude of classes over the course of a year, right? How much does it cost to live on campus if you are a traditional student? And how much does it cost to eat? So the three major factors when you're going to an institution are how much are my classes, how much does it cost to live on campus, and how can I pay for the food that I'm going to eat there, right? So those are the three major things, and we call those direct costs. So parents, juniors, and seniors, if you're thinking about how to pay for college, you really want to make sure that you have those three expenses accounted for. But there are other expenses outside of the direct costs. We call them indirect costs. So for those of the juniors and seniors, if you want a car on campus, there's a cost affiliated with it. You've got to pay that parking permit. You might have to pay for a parking spot or on the garage. You got to pay for gas to get to and from. If you are a commuter also, that's something to consider. There's, of course, obviously the cost of books. You know, that's a big one. And then possibly personal supplies. So the indirect costs aren't something that, that we usually talk about as early as the direct costs, but they are an expense that you do need to be prepared to handle throughout the course of your college experience, because those costs do come up. Okay, so families, now that you're aware of the expenses, you know, ahead of the game, let's talk about how you can afford to pay those. Okay, so most students hear about that term. We all want that infamous, well, not the infamous, but the famous full ride scholarship. Everybody wants it. How can I go to college debt-free? And it can happen, but it doesn't usually happen in the way that we expect. There are many different types of aid that you can use in order to cover all of those expenses. So it's not just one big check that you're going to receive. There's multiple ways to receive money that can take care of the overall cost of attendance for that year. Let's break those down. All right, so you may want to take some notes for this part. So there's 4 different types of financial aid. The first of which is called federal aid. This is going to be the most common type of aid that you'll see. And in order to apply for federal aid, you have to complete something called the Fafsa. It's a free application for federal student aid. That Fafsa allows your scholars, or allows you guys to reach a maximum of about almost $12,000 in federal funds, right? Now, that's not just scholarships. When we think about financial aid, we think it's just scholarships. But when you apply for the Fafsa, you're eligible to receive what's called a Pell Grant, which is like a scholarship. The only difference is that it's coming from the government. You don't have to pay that money back. But you also receive 3 other options: 2 different loans and something called work study, where you can work on campus. But this college is committed to allowing you to prioritize your schooling so that you can work on campus as well as become a high achiever in the classroom. So first type of aid, federal aid, okay? The way that you receive that is by applying for the Fafsa. But there are requirements in order to be eligible to apply for the Fafsa. Two ways that you can apply. 2 requirements that you have to complete. So the first of which is that you have to either be considered a U.S. citizen or have a permanent residence card. You also may have to commit to something called the Selective Service Registration. Selective Service Registration is for young males between the ages of 18 and 26. And even if you're a junior, maybe you're a senior and you haven't turned 18 yet, but if you're applying to college, you have to commit to the Selective Service Registration on this application in order to receive that maximum of $12,000, okay? But many of your colleges may be more than $12,000. How do you pay the rest of your schooling? Well, if you don't meet the requirements for the federal aid, you have the option of pursuing state aid. The state of Texas recognizes that every scholar may not meet the requirements for the Fafsa. If you do not meet the requirements to apply for federal aid, the state of Texas will allow any single student, as long as you are a Texas resident or have lived in Texas for at least a year, to apply for the Texas application for state financial aid. Texas wants to give every student that equal access opportunity to go to an institution of their choosing. The only difference is that the maximum is quite smaller. It's about $5,000 that's a max, where you can receive 2 grants. Now that is the pro. You receive 2 grants, no loans, and you do not have to pay that money back. Okay, so if you don't meet the requirements for the federal aid, or in order to complete the FAFSA, you can apply for the TASFA. Okay, so one or the other. Now what happens after you apply for the FAFSA and the TASFA? Well, you have another option for institutional aid. And when I say institutional aid, again, that means that that is coming from the college. And so when you complete that FAFSA, all of the colleges that you are intending to apply to on your application, on your FAFSA or your TAFSA application, you add those school names, and your FAFSA application or TAFSA application will be sent to those schools, and they will be able to give you more institutional aid. Someone asked, the max amount of federal aid is $11,695 per year. Yes, that is correct. Okay. If you desire to go out of state, you can use that school on the FAFSA. If you're considering going out of state, but you don't meet the requirements for the FAFSA, you will have to check with the institution, because not every school will honor the TASFA application. TASFA is for students applying in the state of Texas. Okay. All right, guys. So again, just as a reminder, the FAFSA is for students who are applying anywhere in the US, okay? And it allows students the opportunity to receive a maximum of almost $12,000. And what that does is that goes to your institutions, and they can also give you financial aid. And if you look on number 3, you'll see that there is no limit to the maximum that they can give you. They will give you as much as you need, but we're going to talk about how that happens in just a moment. You can qualify for scholarships and grants. Okay, and then finally, what happens if the institution doesn't give you as much as you were expecting? Well, one of the biggest things that you can do is apply for outside aid. That's when you apply for those scholarships that you see on websites or from banks or from hospitals or charities. Many times you'll see things like FastWeb or College Greenlight or College Board Big Future, where you apply for those scholarships online. But oftentimes we tend to forget that there are scholarships and outside aid that are coming from local arenas, like your charities, like your hospitals, like your banks, like your jobs. So you definitely want to inquire about those. So someone said the state aid, is there an income limit to qualify? There is not. In order to receive state aid, there has to be a need, right? There has to be a need, but I can give you more information about that in just a moment. What does the student have to commit to in order to apply for the FAFSA? Okay, so again, in order to apply for the FAFSA, if your scholar was born male, they have to commit to what's called the Selective Service Registration. If they're between the ages of 17 and 25, which states that in the event of a draft, they may or may be called on. Okay, and then the other is that they have to either be considered a US citizen or or qualify under certain parameters of US residency. Okay, so just to recap, there's 4 different types of aid. You're gonna apply for either the FAFSA or the TASFA, right? One or the other. In order to apply for the FAFSA, you have to be considered a US citizen, and all males have to check, there's a small checkbox that says that I will commit to selective service registration. If you don't meet those requirements, you can apply for the TASFA, and all of those applications will go to the institution, and you'll have options for that as well. But you also want to apply for outside aid. Okay, should we apply for the outside aid last or anytime? Apply now. Apply for outside aid now. Can't stress that enough. As soon as possible. Apply yesterday. Okay, applying for outside aid is going to be so important. Can you apply for both the FAFSA and the TASFA? No, unfortunately not. Okay, let's move on to our next slide. So let's go over the difference between need-based aid and gift-based aid. When your scholar completes the FAFSA or the TASFA, they're going to receive something called an EFC, and that stands for Expected Family Contribution. At the very bottom of their what they call a student aid report, like when you finish the FAFSA online, there is just an overview of what you've answered, all the questions that you've answered about yourself. They call it the student aid report, and it has a little number up there. That number represents how much your family is expected to contribute to your college education every single year. And so for many families, your EFC may show 0, meaning that your family is not expected to contribute anything to your college experience. But that number could range 0 to, you know, $100,000 depending on your income, depending on how many students you have in college, depending on your taxes. And so once you finish that FAFSA or the TASFA, you'll receive a number called your EFC, which tells you how much you're expected to pay each year. And why is that number important? That number is extremely important. As soon as you finish the FAFSA, look that number up, okay? What that number tells you, or what it tells the institutions, is how much they need to assist you with. So if your EFC says 0, the institution knows that your family cannot contribute much to your college career. So they're gonna do what they can to give what's called need-based aid, okay? That's when the federal government, the state government, and the institution will give you as much aid as they can. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's scholarships. It could be loans and it could be grants, but they're going to try to give you as much aid as possible to take care of the need that you have. Okay? Let me see. For institutional aid, is applying for FAFSA a requirement? No, it is not, but I'll talk about that in just a second. Does the student or the parent have to complete the FAFSA? Both. Okay, so great question. When it comes to the FAFSA and the TASFA, for my seniors and juniors, if your parents aren't online right now, please know that when you complete that FAFSA and TASFA, it's going to be extremely important that you include your parents. There's a portion for scholars and there's a portion for parents. It will generally start with the scholar completing information about yourself, your address, your email address, the schools that you're considering applying to, but then it's going to ask you more detailed information about your family, where your parents will need to disclose information about their taxes, their income, and so on and so forth. You may not have those answers. So yes, I will that you definitely include your parents in the FAFSA and TASFA process. Now, families, I also want to ask that you employ your college counselors. Because your information is usually confidential, this is big stuff. We don't want to disclose your your income or your family background. That's not for us to do, but we are there to assist you in the process. And completing that FAFSA with integrity and accuracy is so important because it could cost you thousands of dollars if you do not complete that application correctly, okay, in the amount of time that colleges are needing you to. There is a deadline to complete the FAFSA and TASFA, and usually the money can run out. So the earlier that you're able to apply and the earlier you're able to apply accurately, the better. Okay. Now, once you complete that FAFSA and TASFA, you may qualify for loans, the L word that many of us don't want to talk about. But loans do not necessarily have to be a bad thing. Now, let me break down the different types of loans that we have. We have direct subsidized and direct unsubsidized Stafford loans. Those are two of the main loans that you will see in the financial aid process. They come from the federal government. So after you complete the FAFSA, they may say that you qualify in the maximum amount of $3,500. So when I told you guys earlier, when you complete the FAFSA, the maximum that you can receive is close to $12,000. Two of those, some of that money is from the Stafford loan, the subsidized loan, and the unsubsidized. $3,500 is subsidized and $2,000 is unsubsidized, but you may not receive that exact amount. Depending on your EFC, you may receive more or less, but let me explain the difference. A subsidized loan is a loan that has about a 5% interest. It's a low interest loan, but as long as your student is in school, every single year, the government is paying the interest on that loan. So all that is what you take out as long as your scholar is in school. And then once they graduate, the Sallie Mae or your institution or the federal government doesn't come to you and say, hey, where's our money? They give your scholar 6 months after they graduate to find employment and to start paying those loans off monthly, okay? So that's how the subsidized loan works. Okay, now an unsubsidized loan, it's another low interest loan. However, with regard to the interest, your scholar does have to pay that interest back. Okay, but it is a smaller amount. That's why it's about $2,000, that a maximum that your scholar can borrow. Now, direct plus loans, this is a tricky one. As a college counselor, I always tell my parents, it is up to your discretion. It's up to your scholar and your family discretion of whether or not you choose a parent plus loan or direct plus loan. It's not one that I always recommend, only because it's one that does check your credit history, and the interest rate is a lot higher, but there isn't really a max to what you can receive in terms of that loan. So a school may say that they're offering you $20,000 a year in terms of a direct parent plus loan, and you use your discretion if that's something that you want to take out. Okay, so these are the ones that come from the federal government, but there's also private loans where you can go to your bank or your credit union to take out loans from there as well. And that interest rate will depend on that particular institution. Okay, before I move on, was there a question that I might have missed? Okay, well, let's move forward. So we talked a little bit about the loans. Why would I ask you to consider it? Well, it is an investment in your future, and it can help cover a gap. So let's say that your school is $20,000, your institution is giving you $15,000, and you have a $5,000 gap. I would definitely recommend the loan, because what it does, it can play a huge part in filling your gap. And most people tend to make enough to take care of the monthly payments that you incur from taking out a loan. So as you can see, there's an image here that shows different educational levels and the median weekly earnings from earning a high school diploma to a bachelor's degree. And while I definitely understand that all are important, no matter if you choose the workforce, military, or college, If you do decide to go off to a 2-year or 4-year institution, most times when you're paying back loans, your monthly income is well over what you need in order to pay off your loan. So it can definitely be something that's realistic. So when does the FAFSA open up? October 1st. That's next Thursday. If you haven't started applying to your colleges, that's okay, but you at least need to know what colleges you are applying to. Now, the reason being, like I said before, if you want that money early, if you want to earn that financial aid as soon as possible, you're going to need to include all of your colleges. Now, they only allow you to add up to 10. So how does that work? If you are applying to 15 schools, you apply to 10, and once you start receiving financial aid from your schools, then you can go back and edit your FAFSA, delete 5 and add another 5, or delete however many you need to in order to edit your FAFSA. Can juniors apply for scholarships and grants? Absolutely, they most certainly can. Okay. So now that we've discussed loans, just remember it's an investment. It's not the end all be all, but it definitely is something that can play into a successful college experience. But there are different types of repayment plans, okay? So there's a standard repayment, tend to pay back a small amount each month and it stays the same. There's a pay as you earn, so depending on what career you tend to have, or if you're trying out different job opportunities from entry level to more advanced, you pay as you earn in terms of your income. There's a graduated repayment that continues to increase the payments that you make over time. And then of course, an income-based repayment plan. So once you take out if you decide to go that route, you can always negotiate what repayment plan you want to pursue. Okay, so we talked about need-based aid. Once you complete that FAFSA, they determine how much you actually need based on your income. But there's also gift-based aid, and gift-based aid generally comes from the institution. So someone asked earlier, can you start applying now? Absolutely. The FAFSA is usually for seniors who are applying to their colleges that year, but if you're a junior, you can apply to institutional aid. Some of those scholarships you can earn as juniors. If you're interested in a fraternity or sorority, there tends to be scholarships and grants through there. If you are involved in your church, you are not usually denied the opportunity to apply for institutional aid because of your classification. So absolutely apply for outside aid. But what I'm going to tell you guys, what's going to be extremely important are your grades and your scores. They impact many times how much you receive in terms of institutional aid. So after you complete that FAFSA and TASFA and your colleges receive those applications, they can determine how much institutional aid give you based on your GPA and test scores. Now, because of COVID, many students haven't had the opportunity to take the ACT. And colleges are aware of that. They will not penalize you for not taking your ACT, but it's up to you to research that. And so if they're not considering your test scores, what they will consider besides your GPA is the strength of your high school curriculum, the strength of your letters of recommendation, the strength of your resume. So what can they learn about you that demonstrates your leadership, your integrity, and your character? Okay, and sometimes they will, you can qualify for institutional aid by going to the school's website. So say for instance, if you really want to apply to school, you go to their website and you type in the search bar general scholarship application, and you can start on their scholarships then and there. Okay. So what if there's a gap after federal or state aid and institutional aid? So again, as I stated before, you apply for the FAFSA or the TAX to receive federal or state aid. And whatever you don't receive from the federal or state government, the institution can give you But what if there's still a gap and you don't want to take out loans? Well, this is why it's so important. And I love that you guys asked that question early. Can I start applying now for outside aid? Yes, 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 and yes. Outside scholarships can come from so many different places. So I know I've had some of my my seniors apply for the Gates Scholarship. Many of you have heard of Bill Gates. That scholarship where you just have to have a 2.5 and a need, and you have to demonstrate your leadership. There's the Ronald McDonald Coca-Cola Scholarship, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Raise Me, Dell Scholars, the Dell Scholarship Fund, where you can receive $20,000 over the course of 4 years, a laptop and a mentor. If you're interested in pursuing an HBCU or historically Black college or university, there's a website called the UNCF website. So there are many different types of aid, and I will comment before we end today, and I'll send you guys some links to different scholarships and grants that you can start applying to. Okay. So how do you best prepare for your pathway? Well, I will say this. It's going to be important that you meet with your college and career counselor, depending on your pathway. If you're in military, that's going to look differently in terms of your financial aid process. If you're looking at going into the workforce or going to a 2-year versus a 4-year, that will impact how you need to prepare. But in terms of the financial aid process, you're going to need to make sure that you have all your documentation ready, parents and scholars, in order to complete these 3 different types of applications. So we talked about the Fafsa, and we clarified earlier that it's open to U.S. citizens, males between the ages 18 to 26. And again, if you're 17 and a senior, that's fine, but you have to register for the Selective Service Registration. FAFSA does apply to schools in state and out of state, as well as private schools, but the TASFA, if you cannot apply for the FAFSA, you can apply for the TASFA, where it's open to Texas residents, but it's only open to schools in the state of Texas. So if you are not considered a U.S. citizen and you are DACA or considered undocumented, that is totally fine to definitely apply for the TASFA. But if you're interested in applying out of state, definitely want to meet with your college counselor in order to keep your information disclosed, but also find schools and institutions that will honor receiving financial aid out of state, because they are there. But what I will say, if you are a high achieving student, you worked really hard, you really want to go to some of the top institutions in the nation, there's another financial aid application called the Css Profile. It's comprehensive, it's lengthy, it can feel challenging, but what it is, it can qualify you for the most amount of institutional aid. The only difference between the Css Profile and the FAFSA and TASFA is that it costs money. It's $25 for the first application to your institution, and then after that it's $16 every other one. But all of these will qualify you for institutional aid as well as federal or state aid. So how do you prepare for next Thursday when the FAFSA and the TASFA opens? You've got to make sure you have these things done. Keep your taxes up to date. The FAFSA and the TASFA honor something what's called prior, meaning that they're going to require your tax information, your parents' tax information from 2 years. So if you're applying for fall of 2021, then you're going to need your tax information from 2019. Okay, so if you're still living with your parents, you are considered what's called a dependent, and you will need that tax information from 2019. And so if you haven't filed taxes, there's still time. You want to get that done. If you need to amend your taxes for whatever reason, do that. You may also need your proof of residency, your W-2 form as proof of income. What I also ask my scholars to go ahead and to retrieve is what's called the Tax Return Transcript, because if your FAFSA is rejected, let's say if an institution or the government needs more information about you, you're going to be what's called selected for verification, and they will require you to submit something that states that what you entered in the FAFSA application is verified, accurate, correct. And so I would very much recommend going ahead and retrieving your 2019 tax return transcript. Okay. There also may be information asked about your bank records, your assets. And so yes, this can feel very intrusive, but I promise you, if you'd like to work with your college counselor, they do not disclose your information. They can walk you through this with legitimacy, accuracy, and in good confidence. All right, I see there's a lot of really great questions. I'm going to get to those in just a moment. But again, like I said, connect with your college and career counselors at your RTCC office. There's one at every Uplift campus. But if you want to learn more information, these are 3 different websites. If I can have my colleagues just type those in the chat. 3 different websites where you can learn more. Studentaid.gov, that tells you more information about the FAFSA and TASFA. College Board, who sponsors the CSS Profile, they can also provide information about how you can receive financial aid from your AP exams and just basic things that you have completed. And then Uplift Education also gives you information about understanding the FAFSA. And there's one more that I meant to include about the TASFA. This collegeforalltexans.com is definitely one. Let me go ahead and type that in the chat section in just a moment. collegeforalltexans.com. Okay, so now I'm going to clear the floor for questions. So I appreciate you guys sitting and listening to me talk for 40 minutes, but let's go through your questions. Okay, thank you so much, Hannah, for, and Robert has posted information from our Uplift website that you definitely want to check out. So again, someone asked, what is the CSS profile? There's more information at the link that Hannah provided. Again, that's a comprehensive application for financial aid, but only 300 institutions, only 300 colleges accept the CSS profile. That's usually for your more competitive and selective institutions. But if you go to collegeboard.org, you can determine what schools accept the CSS profile. Okay, Natalie asked, which one is the best to apply to? Which application is the best to apply to? So it's going to depend on if you meet the requirements. So the most common, the one that I usually ask everyone to apply to is the FAFSA. That's kind of like your standard, that you want to apply for the FAFSA starting October 1st, but you have to meet those requirements. And if you do not meet the requirements where you consider U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or qualified under the residency status, then you can apply for the TASFA. But that usually only applies for schools in the state of Texas. If you are not considered, if you're considered DACA or undocumented, and you want financial aid, you apply for the TASFA and you'll receive state financial aid. Okay, and the CSS profile is another really great opportunity. You can apply to the CSS profile on top of the FAFSA and on top of the TASFA. But you can't do the FAFSA and the TASFA.
Ms. Pritchett, I noticed there have been a few questions on resources for outside scholarships. So do you have, I think you already mentioned this, but can you share again some websites you would recommend? For
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and comment those. Is that in our Q&A?
Yes.
Okay. So these are just a few that I recommend. Now, For your institutional scholarships, that's going to be on your school websites. They usually have general applications that will funnel you into an arena of different scholarships, but just based on your grades and test scores. But I also recommend for my juniors, because we don't hear about a lot of the scholarships for the juniors, but raise.me, excuse me, I typed raiseme.com, but it's raise.me. And what it does is it gives you what's called micro scholarships or mini scholarships based on things that you have already achieved. If you've taken an IB course, you can qualify for, you know, a $100 scholarship. Or if you've taken an AP course and received a 3 or a 4 or 5, you may qualify for 500. And that adds up. So raise.me, College Board, the Dell Scholarship. And I'm going to go back to that outside scholarship. Let's see, that outside scholarship page for my visual learners, because I know I like to see it as well. Okay. Okay. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund, that is a general scholarship for students who identify as Latinx, Latino, Latina, or Hispanic, and it funnels you into hundreds of scholarships. Coca-Cola Scholarship, the Gates Scholarship. There are many different websites that you can use. Fastweb.com. And so if you want to write down just these names, when you research those, I can also post a resource for scholarships as well before we end. Let me see if we have other questions. Now, we will be recording this information, and so we can definitely get this out to you as well.
I can comment as well, Ms. Pritchett. I know there's a few comments in the chat that hit on the caution to exercise when exploring various loan types, and it's particularly private loans. And there are loans where it would require a parent to co-sign and to take on that debt. And so I just want to speak to that, and then please elaborate to that. For some families, it may be necessary to take out loans. And I would say we would first recommend that to be a discussion with the college counselor and the family to really, talk about the pros and cons of that. But then to always consider the federal loans first, if the scholar is eligible for that. When we get to private loans, interest rates may be higher, but we also understand that due to eligibility, that may be the other option for that. But as always, you want to exercise caution, especially with the amount of loans that you may be considering to take out, as that will be accrued debt. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
I do. Thank you so much, Robert. Yes, I agree. 120%. Yes, that is a conversation that you should be having with your parent scholars if you have not already. If your parents have saved up, if you've saved up, if you're working in order to save, and if not, then definitely you may want to consider the loans. However, I do want to ask that you guys ensure that you are speaking with and building relationships with your college counselors, not just your high school counselors, but the college admissions counselors, because if there is a gap, sometimes you can negotiate for more financial aid in terms of scholarships and grants. Sometimes you can negotiate for scholarships based on your major in order to prevent from having to do that. Like I said, as a counselor, I do not always recommend the direct parent loan. Just personally, the interest rate is higher, and oftentimes there are larger loans amounts that are required to be taken out. But again, that is a conversation that you guys want to have, and that's up to your discretion. But I don't recommend taking out more than about between $6,000 and $8,000 in terms of loans if you don't have to. But that's why it's so important to work with your college counselors, because many times they're helping you to find best fit colleges, and not just based on your interest and not just based on your majors, but based on schools that also qualify you for great financial aid packages. So it's a team effort. The way that they say it takes a village to raise a child, it takes scholar, parent, church members, it takes your college counselors, your career counselors. Be having those conversations now, so that if you do decide that you want to take out the Parent Plus loan, it's something that you have spoken about and you're aware of early. And so if you take it out for that 1 year, maybe you earn a scholarship, or your GPA is so high to where you don't have to take it the next year. Because what happens is the cost of attendance is only for 1 year. So every year you have to complete the FAFSA and the TASFA. Every single year for as long as you're in school. And so you don't want to have to continually take out the same amount of loans every year. Sometimes you can decrease that amount depending on how successfully you prepare each year. If you're working, if you're performing work study, or if you're working a job outside of campus, if your grades are, if you're achieving, excelling in the classroom. And so you just want to be diligent. You just want to ask questions. Stay in the financial aid office once you get to college. Make sure they see your face and know you. You know, that's so important.
I also, to Sarita's point about working with Uplift, Road to College and Career staff, Uplift is very unique in that we have a lot of technology and resources that help families and scholars compare financial aid at the schools that they apply to. And one thing that my team with the Career Exploration and Career Services is really hoping to integrate into some of this advising and decision making is what some of those long-term career paths, like the return on the investment. And so when you think about taking out loans and you think about what career path that you will have when you finish that degree, thinking about what salary you'll earn and how long that will take to pay back those loans. And it really helps paint a picture of feeling more comfortable when taking out loans depending on your major. And it often can even change some scholars' minds and thinking about, you know, earning more money and being able to pay off their loans quicker. And it's all just this full circle picture. So I just wanted to connect that dot and to maybe ease some of that tension around loans, and knowing some careers, taking out a loan is necessary to be able to earn that degree. But the amount that you can pay back and the amount that you'll be living comfortably with, the return is so much greater because you'll be in a career path that allows you to do that. And so I'm going to drop another link, and it was mentioned previously, what can we be doing at home or in the meantime, if you're not necessarily even a junior or senior, you can start to explore some of those careers and what those salaries look like. So when you see a loan calculated and you compare it to a salary and bills, and as we all know, these things that come up, you can start to really manage and start to help the scholars think about budgeting and how paying back loans actually sometimes is more feasible than looking at that large number. So
thank you so much, Camille. I cannot believe I forgot that. I appreciate you. Yes. That's why it's so important to meet with your college counselors. We advise you. We sit down and we go through your pathway, you know, every step of the way. And so depending on your major, depending on your anticipated career, we do look at the return on investment. And what that means is we do look at what's your anticipated salary look like. If you do decide to take out a loan, what does that look like in terms of the repayment process? And oftentimes the senior or junior who was most scared, or if the family that was, you know, very apprehensive about that process, is able to take a load off and say, okay, I can plan for this. Or okay, maybe I won't take out the loan. It's really just a conversation. So definitely make sure that you're introducing yourself to the college counselors if you haven't done so already, the career counselors. As you guys can see, we have Camille and Hannah who are here today as well, who can give you more information. But I do want to get to all questions. Someone says, when does the FAFSA and TASFA end? It's usually around January 15th. It used to be March, but let me check just to be sure. That's the deadline. Okay. So they have something called priority applications for financial aid for the institution. So to qualify for the most amount of financial aid, you need any priority application deadline that you can. That just means that it's an early deadline and it usually gives you more money. The only caveat to it is that it is competitive. And so you may be in amongst the ranks of those who are sending in really great letters of recommendation, great test score GPA, but don't count yourself out. If you know that you have some struggle areas, still try to apply for those priority deadlines. Now, in terms of the FAFSA and TAFSA closing, I see here it says that the FAFSA will close June 30th, 2021. But check with your schools. Just because the FAFSA closes doesn't mean that your institutions will allow you to apply for financial aid that late. Okay. Are there other questions? Will we share the slides? Absolutely. Again, this will be recorded, so we'll be sharing this out very soon. What is the grant versus a loan? Okay, so again, grants are like scholarships. The only difference between grants and scholarships is that scholarships are based on merit, meaning that your GPA, your test scores, your leadership, all of the things that really make your scholar shine, you know, academically and socially. And grants are money, again, that you don't have to pay back. They're not loans. They're money that you don't have to pay back, but they're based on need. How much does your scholar need that money based on your income, based on, you know, what you file on your taxes. So both are gift-based aid, meaning that you do not have to pay it. Gift-based aid is, don't have to pay it back. Can I fill out the FAFSA without putting a school? Yes. However, you only qualify for that money from the federal government. And so if you know that you need to, if you know if the cost of attendance of your school is a certain amount and the FAFSA only gives you up to 12,000, you may have a large gap. So it's going to be important that you include your schools. Fill the FAFSA out completely, accurately, ask questions, seek advising if you need to. But yes, you absolutely want to include your schools on the FAFSA and TASFA applications. Now, I didn't talk about it as much, but with the TASFA application, it's usually a paper application. However, some schools will allow you to apply online. And when you fill out this paper, you can receive it from your college counselors. You just send them a quick email, they'll forward it to you. You have to fill it out once, and we can make copies to go to each individual institution. Okay? Is there a family income max limit to qualify for the FAFSA or TASFA loans? That's a great question. I'm not sure about that. I will definitely find that out for you if you'd like to leave your information, but I can get back with you.
Ms. Pritchett, to add to that question, because you know, FAFSA and TASFA is really used to determine financial need, correct? And
Right.
so let's just say based on that, there may not be a need that's determined based on the application. However, a completed TASFA or FAFSA application would be necessary to be considered for perhaps a merit-based scholarship or outside scholarships. Is that correct, or not necessarily the case?
With outside scholarships?
Yeah, so let's just say there's not need determined by the FAFSA or TASFA. Would the completion of the application be required to still be considered for merit-based scholarships?
Yes, most times, yes. However, if you apply for those general scholarships, you may still receive aid, but many times receiving outside aid will be dependent upon you completing that FAFSA, again, completely and accurately. And so your need will be determined from your EFC. So that's why having your W-2s, your 2019 tax return transcript, all of that is going to be super important. So someone asked, well, can your school counselor help you to fill it out? Yes, absolutely. That's what we're here for. And we actually we want you guys to come to us too, so that we can assist you, because again, like I said, not filling it out completely and accurately by the deadline could cost you thousands of dollars. And that's the last thing we want. We don't just want you to get to college, right? We don't just want you to get to your careers. We want to help afford you the opportunities to give you options that are financially sound. Okay. Many of our generations have walked away with debt. We do not want to continue that cycle if you do not have to do it. So we don't want to repeat the wheel.
Right. And I think that's an important point to make, to where even if a family may think, well, I don't think, the FAFSA or the TASPA would show what we need help financially. However, completing it will still be necessary for the scholar to be considered for additional scholarships.
Absolutely. And if you do not file taxes, you may have to go back and do that now. Then again, if you are considering applying for the TASPA and you do not meet the requirements for in order to apply for your taxes, what you will possibly need to do is have some type of documentation proving how you're able to afford your livelihood. But again, talk to your college counselor. We do not disclose your personal information. I know this is very sticky because this is your personal income information, but we use this just to walk you through the process so that nothing's incorrect and yet you have no problems in terms of financial aid. Now, if I did not get to your question, please feel free to retype it one more time.
Yeah, I think we're at time. Can we speak on, or just briefly, because I know this may be a concern, just what would you share with families who, just to make sure that they're cautious of potential scams that may be reaching them through the mail or maybe an email? Like what should they be looking out for?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert, for asking that. So your scholars will be receiving a ton of emails from institutions, and they're probably being flooded with institutional emails. In terms of financial aid and scholarships, if a school is asking them to pay for an application for scholarships, it's a scam. You should not have to pay to apply for scholarship dollars. The only time you're paying for anything is that's with that Css Profile application. But again, that's through a legitimate website, the College Board website. If you're still unsure about your institutions, about financial legitimacy of the websites, just seek your college counselor, shoot them a quick email. And Robert, if you'd like to expand, by all means.
I think you hit it. Yeah. Anyone that's asking for a payment for an application, or you must give us $100 so that we can give you $1,000, those are scams. And so you definitely want to avoid those communications with potential scammers. And good rule of measure is, if you feel like there's something fishy or you're just not too sure, maybe they're asking for information that you haven't been asked for and other things, perhaps, social security number or just details that just seem off. Definitely check in with your college counselor and just say, hey, is this legit? What should I do? And they'll be able to guide you along the way. You also just want to be mindful of what you get in the mail. There may be potential scams through that way. And so that's where it's really important to be in communication with your RTCC staff so they can help you look out for those things. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in, where we have to be on the lookout for potential scams.
But guys, folks, I appreciate you taking the time out. This was just a basic overview over the different financial aid. It can get very detailed. It can get very comprehensive. So speaking with your RTCC staff will be important. Income does affect you. Natalie, I just wanted to get to that question, but see your RTCC counselor and they'll assist you in that way.